Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee, and I serve as the marketing manager over here at Complete Coachworks. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar series, where we aim to provide insights and solutions for the challenges that operations are facing today. In today's session, we will feature Patrick Scully, our president at CCW, and we're also pleased to have Heather Dalmelin from Mountain Line Transit as our guest speaker. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the chat. Paula Red, our sales support manager, will be assisting with the Q&A portion after the presentation. Now, without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Pat to kick off our discussion on midlife refurbishments.
Great. Thanks, Kaylee, and welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Some of you may recall we've done a few webinars over the past 2 years. This is the latest in our series focusing on the benefits of fleet refurbishment or vehicle refurbishment as part of your overall fleet strategy. As Kaylee introduced, I'm president of Complete Coachworks, and we're honored to have Heather Dalmelin of Mountain Line in Flagstaff, Arizona. I will start the presentation, and then Heather will present her information towards the second half, and then we'll allow time for questions. So we probably need about 20 minutes to go through the slides and then open it up to questions thereafter. So again, welcome everybody. Next slide, Kaylee. So for those that don't know Complete Coachworks, we are 3 operating companies: Complete Coachworks, Transit Sales International, and Shuttle Bus Leasing. You can see the physical footprint we have on the right side of the slide. The top picture is our campus in Riverside, California, where Complete Coachworks is headquartered, and we operate within that complex and campus and perform the majority of our refurbishment work there at that location. For the Shuttle Bus Leasing and Transit Sales International part of the organization, we have a very significant inventory of buses at our yard in Murrieta, which is about 30 minutes south of Riverside, and that is the picture that's shown in the bottom right. And we have upwards of 1,000 units that we keep in inventory that can be redeployed. And that's of important note because we either take customer buses and refurbish them, or we can also provide vehicles from our inventory for refurbishment and deployment, with the concept that they are ready for quick deployment to the market based on the scope of work from each individual customer. Next slide. Our footprint, and you saw the pictures, but this just shows it geographically. Our Complete Coachworks operation is California-based. I mentioned Riverside and Murrieta, California. We also have a facility in Alameda, just in the Bay Area, primarily to support a very significant contract we have there with the San Francisco Muni operation there, where we have a contract. We also operate along the border with Mexico. That's our shuttle bus leasing operation, where we have facilities to support our contracts with the federal government, and that is obviously a very significant operation at those locations. Overall, we employ about 360 employees across all of our locations. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're 3 companies under one umbrella. Complete Coachworks is the bus refurbishment and repair operation, and that will be our primary focus today. Transit Sales International is the selling arm, primarily of pre-owned buses from our inventory. And then similarly, Shuttle Bus Leasing is the leasing arm, using the buses in our inventory. But basically, we operate under one umbrella with the same leadership, and all of which are based here in Riverside, California. Next slide. And for at least Complete Coachworks, the specialization areas that we focus on, and again, the topic of today's discussion is bus midlife refurbishment, but we handle all types of retrofits, of whether it's engines or changing from one powertrain to another, or CNG tank retrofits, or wheelchair lifts or ramps, and anything in between. Similarly, we do accident repairs, as I mentioned, repowers, also sales and leasing, and then we also perform installations at customer locations when required, where we deploy our labor to your location to do specialty work on your fleet. The criticality of all that is we have been known for and specialize in a great deal of flexibility to solve fleet issues, and we can deploy quickly. And we've been known from an innovation standpoint to do things that are a little bit off the beaten track, but find overall solutions to your fleet problems. Next slide. So let's get into the meat of the matter, which is midlife refurbishment. You can see a completed bus on the right, but it's really, the way we look at it, a very viable option for transit agencies and fleets in general to fill fleet gaps by extending life of either your current buses or buses that are acquired from us. And, the two main elements are, the price that a bus refurbishment can be performed at, and the delivery time frame versus a new bus procurement. And basically what, we say is that the pricing is in the range of half the price and delivery is in half the time. So half the price and half the time is the motto. And really, it's a bridging strategy often when you're waiting for new bus deliveries, or as you deploy or implement a zero emission bus strategy, which in recent times have seen some, whether it's delays in deliveries or operational issues where you have a need for vehicles. And that's where the approach to midlife refurbishment comes in. And ultimately, the big picture is that the structure of the bus is reasonably sound, but the midlife refurbishment process replaces key wear components within that bus structure. Next slide. So what are those items that do get addressed? It runs the spectrum from everything you see on the screen to as little or much as a budget would allow. Obviously, the dollars is the critical issue, but typically the things that we see are engines, transmissions, associated systems like cooling, interior elements that the riding public would want to see, whether it's seating, interior, or exterior paint and body, and then other systems that have either run their useful life, including door systems, destination signs, and so on. So really, it's a updating of the vehicle to either current technology or items that play a role in making sure that the riding public sees the improvements, and quite frankly, often can't tell the difference between a refurbished bus and a new bus. Next slide. So the steps in the process, and you can see the pictures on the right. Sometimes we take the vehicle right down to the bare metal and build it back up, but basically the scope of work is the most critical item to begin with. And as noted, that's the work done directly with the transit agency based on budget and the elements that they want to have addressed with the refurbishment. But once that scope is finalized, and we provide obviously a document and documents to assist in that process where you can pick and choose from the scope. But once that's finalized, we then get into parts acquisition, which tends to be the biggest item from a lead time and delivery perspective. We are somewhat at the mercy of major components, long lead times, whether it's engines, transmissions, or at times some of the electronic systems that are on vehicles. And then from there, once we get the bus in, we begin the tear down and inspection, and then begin by component installation. Oftentimes, we also have extra work that's associated with the vehicle, and there has to be part of the budget that's associated with that work. And then, if applicable, paint and body, and then final QA and customer delivery. Normally, that process can be upwards of 9 months, and sometimes shorter, but again, specifically at the mercy of longer lead time items. And depending on the scope of work, how deep that scope is depends on the timing. But again, if you're looking at, months versus years, as some of you may know, recent delivery timeframes from OEMs are rather extended into the, beyond 1 year and into 2 and more years, depending on the vehicle being acquired. Next slide. All right, so what are the advantages? Obviously, there's a cost advantage. I mentioned it earlier. We'll get into that in a few slides. And what that cost advantage allows you to do is leverage available funds to refurbish multiple buses. So basically, it's a 2-for-1, if you will, on versus new buses. The delivery period, as I noted, months versus years. You can use FTA funds for midlife overhauls. And obviously, if you're using your own vehicles, maintain fleet commonality and consistency, and bridges gaps when you have delays in some of your other fleet deployments. And when we look at it in a few slides, a very cost-effective fleet strategy, especially in times of challenged budgets and available funds that many agencies are currently facing. Next slide. So what to consider when adopting this fleet strategy? Many of these items were noted earlier, but primarily budget. Obviously, how much money is available to perform the work. I'll get into an average pricing in just a moment, so you get a scale. But beyond that, it's obviously, the year of the bus and the propulsion and so on. Developing the scope of work, selecting the components, based on the budget, what is required versus the elective items. And then the biggest cost drivers tend to be the powertrain, and then a focus on customer amenities, as I mentioned a moment ago, whether it's interior or exterior elements that show to your riding public that, this can look as a new bus versus a used bus. And then basically all that balances with, budget and maintenance costs. So next slide. All right, let's get into a little bit deeper discussion about the return on investment for refurbishment. And we've done this for a few customers. I've got some examples here where we've taken a 50 bus replacement cycle for new buses and applied it to an ROI. You'll see that in just a moment, but this can be scaled for any size of operation and any, annual fleet deployment or replacement. Next slide. All right, so as noted, it's really a key part of a transit agency's overall fleet strategy, and the application of scarce funds and completion in months versus years. But the basically taking customer buses or our own buses and replacing the high wear or end of life components, and it extends the life of vehicles, another 8 to 10 years, which is pretty significant, right? You can take a nominally bus that retires, tends to be retired in 12 years per FTA requirements, and can get it to fundamentally 20 years and beyond. And as noted, it's really, quite frankly, a viable option in recent times with decreased fundings and budget issues. And as noted, FTA funds can be used for refurbishment. Next slide. All right, so a bit of an eye chart, but what this shows you is that the many of the systems, which are the shorter bars, whether it's engine, transmission, major components, they tend to have a life cycle somewhere in the 7-ish years period, whereas other parts of the vehicle, primarily the structure, can last well beyond that, right? And so you tend to tailor the scope of work to the specific needs of the agency, depending on how long they want to keep their vehicles and depending on the overall fleet strategy and the focus on the major systems that may require replacement. Next slide. So as we get into the ROI analysis, we look at some average prices. This is, our best estimation of both new bus average market pricing and refurbished bus average pricing. But diesel bus is currently in the $800,000 range, ranging up to $1.5 million for electric buses, where if you see the average refurbishment prices from the work that we do, the percentage is essentially 50% of new bus pricing. So that goes back to what I said earlier, essentially half the price. So you get a 2-for-1 ratio, when you do refurbishment, and all of that, the pricing that you see here assumes pretty much an average. And, there are many elective items like ITS systems and electronics that tend to increase price. We've taken an average here of both new bus and refurbished pricing. So I hope this gives you a good frame of sort of the metrics from a pricing perspective. Next slide. So one big area of focus is, okay, I get it at half the price, but what are my bus operating costs post refurbishment? And it's a little tough to get reasonable data on operating costs, whether it's in the first, call it 12 years of the vehicle, or after when we do a refurbishment. So we've scanned the market, and we have found data, and obviously there is improvement in operating costs of the vehicle after the refurbishment is done. But what we've done is we've looked at data from 3 sources: from St. Louis, who has reasonably good data, and also the National Transit Institute, and tried to get data from one of our largest customers, San Francisco. But the bottom line, and you'll see it in the analysis in a moment, we've used $1.25 average for the operating costs of the vehicle after refurbishment. But you'll see in a moment that that is not a very big driver when we look at the overall return on investment of refurbishment. So suffice it to say, for operating costs post refurbishment, $1.25 is what we're using here in this analysis. Next slide. So on the left, what we have is a per bus assessment for a diesel vehicle, and on the right, we have a similar approach to a natural gas bus. So you can see the savings from a purchase price perspective, or call it a capital cost, is essentially the same. $800,000 for a diesel bus, refurbishment at $400,000, and the same scale for a CNG bus. So you save $400,000. Then we looked at the cost per mile and said, well, what is a new bus? New bus average in the same frame that we noted earlier, 85 cents a mile. So you have this, call it incremental 40 cents per mile operating cost for the vehicle after refurbishment. And then if you look at average mile per year of $50,000, the operating cost per year is incremental, with the $1.25 is only $20,000. So when you look at it, the metrics really focus on refurbishment buses being a fundamental benefit. When you take over the 8 years, that you get a $240,000 savings out of the vehicle when you take 8 years of operating costs at $20,000 per year. So you save $400,000, get an extra 8 years out of the vehicle, $20,000 incremental per year, still saving $240,000 if we're being conservative on the cost per mile. So still a net positive overall. Next slide. And then if we allocate that, then we take the same approach and say, well, what does it mean to 50 buses that get replaced? And again, it's the same metrics for both. On the left, which is a diesel bus, on the right is a CNG bus, basically comes out the same. The incremental here gets pretty significant, and obviously gets scaled depending on the size of your agency. But if we take a 50 bus annual new bus replacement and say, well, we'll do 25 new buses and 25 refurbished buses, you save $9.5 million in the new scenario by allocating 25 vehicles to refurbishment versus buying 50 new buses. And so you see those operating savings that we mentioned, or the overall savings we mentioned on the prior slide, on a per bus basis get significantly magnified when you start getting additional volume. So, when we look at it, we had recent meetings with customers where they have real budget issues. This is a real and viable solution that can be brought to the organization in times of challenged budgets. So we really see it as a very significant fleet strategy option for agencies across the country. Next slide. So in summary, obviously, it's a viable option as noted. You can save upwards of 25% of your capital dollars in the scenario that we just mentioned. You can use FTA funds. You need to scope out, the level of refurbishment. And quite frankly, we are the industry leader in bus refurbishment, having done well over 1,000 vehicles, refurbishing them over the past 38-year history. So with that said, I will now turn the microphone over to Heather and allow her to present her experience with refurbishment. Heather?
Thanks, Patrick. So good morning, Heather Domlin. I do serve as the CEO and General Manager for Mountain Line. We are the transit program in the greater Flagstaff area in Northern Arizona. So think pine trees. And I'm happy to join and talk a little bit about the decision-making that went into our choice for CCW and refurbishment of vehicles. Next slide. So before I jump into decisions, just a little bit about Flagstaff. We are located at 7,000 foot elevation. We do celebrate 4 seasons a year. It historically have reached 100 inches of snow. This year we got about 40, so it's not been a really great snowfall for us. But we do operate 9 bus routes. We have roughly 2 million riders. We do have 4 dedicated mechanics, and we do everything but what we call heavy mechanical repairs on site. So an engine refurbishment may go off site. Our original, we have 4 buses that are really excellent candidates for refurbishment right now. The average age of our fleet is about 10 years old, but we do actually have one vehicle that is from 2006 that until the day we took it to CCW was actually still used in service here in Flagstaff with its original hybrid electric battery pack on it. All of our vehicles are fully depreciated at this point, and so we are looking at how do we use these vehicles different. Our local useful life is defined as 15 years. So we are looking to gain 4 like new buses through the refurbishment process. And one of the things we want to do with those 4 vehicles is allow us to advance service improvements while facing resiliency as we transition to zero emission buses. And then also to be able to use those vehicles in local events. So we are funding these 4 refurbishments with local funds to expand our contingency fleet. Next slide. I'm sure I'm not speaking to anyone who doesn't experience this, but there are challenges as your fleet ages. We are seeing repair cost exceed budget by about 30 to 40% on an annual basis as more and more components fail. With those failures, we have reduced reliability of our fleet. So we are now faced with, do we train people or do we operate services, which is never a good position to be in. As mentioned on the last slide, we really are looking to improve our fleet resiliency. We have 2 battery electric buses now. We have a plan to purchase more in the future when those funds are again available to us. But one of the biggest reasons we addressed the refurbishment idea is we didn't want to put our buses in the junkyard. We think of refurbishment as an idea to recycle what we already own. So instead of having buses built from scratch with all of the things that go into it, can we reuse some of those investments we already have and avoid putting all of that, let's say, steel in the junkyard? And then, of course, as Patrick mentioned, there are challenges to the rising cost of new vehicles and the timeline for getting those vehicles. Our original plan was to retire these 4 vehicles that we're refurbishing with a disposal. But ultimately, this gives us the option of looking at not doing that and instead replacing those components and keeping these vehicles in our fleet. Next slide. So some of these are going to start to sound repetitive. We have the refurbishment of the 4 vehicles that we're looking at. We are estimating the cost of each refurbishment to be about 50% of what a new bus would cost. We don't have federal funding for those new vehicles, and so this reduced the demand from our local funding source to replace vehicles. Our new vehicles estimate is about 3 years now to get a new vehicle. Our estimate for refurbished buses is 6 months. So for us, that was very attractive. And then again, the environmental responsibility of this decision, the improving our service resilience, and then really making our vehicles available to other events. As I mentioned earlier, we are in Northern Arizona. We are 2 hours north of the metropolis of Phoenix. And we don't have a lot of special service providers in our community. And so we really want to be able to respond to marketing events, to even silly things like our county fair or concerts in the park. And our buses and these 4 vehicles that will be funded locally allow us to expand how we provide those services and respond to those community needs. Next slide. And so one of the questions we've been asked is why CCW? In 2023, I actually had the opportunity to see the 50/50 bus, and it was intriguing to me, and it allowed us to have some engaging conversations with the experts at CCW. And really the partnership offered to us through the assessment of the vehicles, the experts that have helped our staff understand the refurbishment process has allowed us to create buy-in from our team members on why this is a good solution. Obviously, refurbishing vehicles means that your mechanic team or your fleet team supports that decision, or they'll fight those refurbished vehicles as successful. So it was important to us to have that. We really wanted to make sure our partner in this process understood our goals and our definition of success, and that there was clear communication with our team members. And lastly, commitment from CCW to deliver on time and on budget was a crucial part of our decision making. Next slide. And so the success outcomes of this process are stewardship of resources, financial sustainability, that the buses are back in service within roughly 6 months. The cost is nearly 50% less than a new bus, and we are nearly doubling the vehicle life. Our community and our board of supervisors supported this effort, and we're excited to get these vehicles back and test them in our community. We really predict this will be a win-win for our riders, our community, and Mountain Line's future successes. And with that, I think, Patrick, that's everything that I had.
Great, thank you, Heather. Any questions, you can put them in. Oh, sorry. We have one more slide. So I think, again, a re-emphasis, right? Cost-effective alternative to new buses, the delivery timeline, the bridging the gap, especially with new bus deliveries or zero emission bus strategies, and then replacing key components as part of the scope of work. So with that said, thank you, Heather. And I don't see any questions yet in the chat. So as we wait for those, maybe one clarification item that Heather mentioned. She mentioned the 50/50 bus, and you might be wondering, well, what is the 50/50 bus? And that is a marketing bus that we have where we have a older bus, an older than 12-year bus that we left one half of the bus unfinished, and the other half of the bus refurbished. And it basically allows the discussion to, with customers like Heather, say, hey, this is the before and after. Basically, the roadside of the bus longitudinally was left untouched, and the curbside of the bus was updated. So it allows customers to see that effect. And obviously, Heather, for you, it was a benefit to begin that discussion of refurbishment. So there is a question in the chat. Will we provide a copy of the slides after the meeting? I think Kaylee will have this recorded, so I think you can find that information on our website. I believe that's the case, right, Kaylee?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so you can find the slides there. I will ask another question, Heather, and this is maybe a tough one, but so if you look at the budget that you had and you allocated dollars to the refurbishment process, presumably you saved money. What did you do with that money? Or did you just, in the case of maybe reduced or funding, maybe you didn't have the money to begin with, but maybe just some insight there as to the
Sure.
potential savings and what you did with those savings.
Sure. So a little bit about our bus replacement policy here at Mountain Line. One, we use vehicles for 15 years at a minimum, and then we start to budget those replacements. We try to apply for that money about 5 years in advance of needing a replacement, just trying to think of the timeline for getting those vehicles. So the 4 vehicles that we've sent or are sending for refurbishment, we have 2 sent and 2 pending. They were slated for replacement with an order of vehicles that's coming in this fall. So we had federal funds to replace those vehicles. And ultimately, our decision was to refurbish them versus dispose of them. The long-term financial impact of doing that was we committed to basically an extra $2.2 million in local funds to refurbish these vehicles now, instead of committing that to the local portion of a federally funded bus 3 to 5 years from now. So we have front loaded the cost a little bit on our system, but ultimately we would have spent that near same amount in local match for replacing those vehicles down the road. So we consider this as the ability to conserve our federal applications for expansion vehicles and not always replacement vehicles. Again, part of what went into our decision was really about the sustainability of this choice. Don't put a used vehicle in a junkyard. Reuse what's already been created out of materials. So I hope I answered that question, but ultimately it was a commitment from us to just expend a little bit of extra local money now. We would have spent that money down the road.
Okay, that's great insight. Thank you, Heather. And I think for the listeners, the environmental messaging that Heather is saying, we've certainly heard it from others. Another customer called it the new green, not having to use, whether it's energy or raw material and resources, but to recycle, right? And that is a compelling argument or a compelling message, especially from an elected official perspective, and certainly within some cities that are more environmentally focused than others. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Let me take each of them. So the first one is, and maybe more to you, Heather, we would need an all-in price quote to apply for an FTA grant. Do you send anyone to properties to put this together, or do you know exactly the price until you have it disassembled in the shop? Yeah, we provide the scope of work and pricing upfront. So that is known and should, if you're doing a grant, it should be able to be provided within that grant application. The only thing that occurs afterwards, and there's at times some extra work that is required over and above the scope. There may be some damage to the bus in other areas that need to be fixed that were unknown until we got the bus in, but that's really smaller dollars. So from our perspective, you have that pricing from us well in advance and would apply to an FTA grant. So maybe not applicable in your case, Heather, but I don't know if there's any insight you have there in providing that or answering that question.
Yeah, so we in looking at budgeting this, because we did budget it out of our local, right? So we used a 20% change order theory. So we took the value of the quote, we estimated that we could receive change orders up to 20% of that value. Just to ensure that we had enough local capacity. We think that's really important. We do the same thing on bus orders. What I apply for an order today, we know at the end of the day could be significantly higher. I know our recent hybrid order, each vehicle went up by almost a full 30% between time of order and time of build. So we do the same thing in this situation where we're trying to accommodate that escalation at the beginning. So that's our practice. And then I know on the federal side, when we have those leftover monies, we just transfer them into other ALIs to ensure we continue to support our fleet with preventative maintenance and other things. But that's how we've been handling that. And I will tell you, the first vehicle is nearly completed with inspections now at CCW, and we are under the 20% estimation.
Okay, great. Good insight, Heather. Next question from Ryan Haryutunian. Hello, Ryan. I recognize you at the beginning, but his question is, can a midlife refurbishment allow an agency to delay uncertainties in upcoming emission changes and challenges? I think the quick answer to that is yes. I call it bridging the gap. Obviously, there are specifics related to whether it's a state requirement in the state of California. Obviously, there's a plan that had to be put in place to achieve zero emissions, but many of those plans had to be delayed primarily because of zero emission technology delays. And then obviously other cities and regions have their own specifics, but generally, yes, the idea primarily is that to use proven technology and often diesel buses, but can also be CNG or hybrid, that have a higher degree of reliability than maybe other vehicles that have been deployed, and specifically zero emission vehicles that come with some new technology issues, but also issues related to operations and range and charging that are well known. So within that context, then extending the life of existing vehicles and getting, whether it's the local board or whether it's the state or whatever other, regulations they have, you can delay the implementation of zero emission plans as a result. So it is dependent on the local agency, but the quick answer, overall is yes, it's a bridging strategy for sure. So hope that answers the question, Ryan, and thank you for the question. Okay, so I don't see any other questions yet. We'll give it just a minute. I do think overall, guys, the message is, and I think Heather certainly corroborated, a very effective fleet strategy delivered in half the time at half the price, and quite compelling from a financial situation or financial perspective when you look at challenged budgets and reallocation of those resources. So with that said, I don't see any other questions. We appreciate everybody's attendance. Thank you very much for joining. Heather, a sincere thank you to you for taking the time out of your schedule. Thank you for this presentation, your trust in us, and your order with us. We look forward to delivering buses to you later this summer and showing that success to you in your operations. So thank you again, everybody. Appreciate the time. Have a great day.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.